All right, welcome everyone. My name is Todd Harris and I lead product marketing at Percona. I will be your host today too. So we are here for a really fun stream today, and we're doing this stream because we get asked a lot about our opinion on releases related to the databases that we service and support. And this is, of course, a big week for MongoDB, and here we are to talk about it. Of course, MongoDB.live was this week, some big announcements, and we're here to talk about all of that. So I will say that if you're tuning in now, and I'll remind those that tune in late, feel free to ask your questions wherever you are, wherever you're watching. We're streaming on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitch, and there'll be no gaming, but be as good as you can get on Twitch. Zoom, of course, for those that are here on Zoom. And we'll do our best to get all the questions that are positioned across those. If we don't get to your question along the way, we will at some point. It may not be live right now, but we will get to it, we promise, either in a blog format or in a post-event email. And of course, the replay will be sent very soon after, and we'll make sure everyone gets their hands on that. So let's get going. You can see there's some others here with me today. This is called Percona and Friends, right? So we're going to have some Percona, some friends. And you know, I love the concept of this. I think we'll do it again in the future, but let's focus on today. Today we have from Percona, we have Akira Kurogane. Akira is the MongoDB product owner at Percona, otherwise known as the master of MongoDB puppets, wandering MongoDB samurai, and the oracle of the MongoDB matrix. What do you think of that, Akira? Okay. Kimberly, on to you. I don't know if yours is quite this bad, and don't worry, Guy and Bill, I didn't do this to you, I don't think. Kimberly Wilkins is also here. She is Percona's MongoDB tech lead with 20 plus years of experience in managing and architecting databases. And from what I've seen so far in my time here, she usually plays the adult in the room, keeping us all in line, which is really appreciated, especially for me. And Kimberly's actually, as you can sort of maybe tell, she's on a boat somewhere right now. I don't know where she is. It's undisclosed location, but somehow she got some internet that is probably faster than mine here. So, but we can say that this panel is effectively scattered across the globe. And I say that because the friends part of the Percona and Friends being one, Guy Harrison. So Guy, I think you are in Australia, if I'm not mistaken. And you are the CTO of Southbank Software, the creators of Proven DB, which is a cloud-based database service combining MongoDB with blockchain storage, and the author of MongoDB Performance Tuning. And it's 1 a.m. where you are, so I'm sorry and thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great to be here.
Bill, thank you, sir, for being here. Another member of the Friends part of Percona and Friends. He's CTO and co-founder of Carbine, BI tool designed specifically for NoSQL databases. And Bill, I don't think it's 1 a.m. for you, is it?
No. It's a nice 11 a.m.
Nice. So I suggested maybe next time we do this, if we have a couple of the Percona or Friends, that we flip it and maybe we do 1 a.m. Eastern time. So maybe we'll see. Anyway, to kick it off, what if we have everyone here, and for those that are watching online and have access to chat, you can play too. We'll try to get your opinions from this too. What if to start, we have everyone here give their impressions of this week, so meaning MongoDB Live, in 10 words or less. Akira, do you want to go first?
Okay. My impression of the version 5.0 that came out and the conference would be that, well, it's just focused on version 5.0 mostly, but I feel that MongoDB's evolution days are finished and we're seeing the start of its legacy era. That's just that trajectory of development is the start of MongoDB's legacy era. I'm referring to the core server, not the rest of the services that MongoDB provides in its cloud application and its MongoDB data platform, as they're calling it this year. But as the core server, yeah, I feel it's the beginning of MongoDB's legacy era.
Okay, Kira, if I had a button to press as a game show host, I would do the thing, because you are at like 300 words there. So
yeah.
Yes, you lose. So Guy, next, would you like to go?
Agree. It's a steady as she goes release, nothing too surprising, nothing too disappointing.
Fair. Kimberly?
Oops, you're on mute.
I think the two biggest things that for me is the ability to reshard, right? Because I've done a lot of work in sharding over the years and seen customers pick the shard keys that they thought were really going to work and not be able to. So that's super big. And then two, of course, I think for MongoDB itself, the ability to offer the time series collections and put a little more effort behind it is going to be super important for them and for people who do want to have just the general one purpose NoSQL database.
Nice. And Bill, I don't see you. Your video's off, I think, but I think you're still here, correct?
I am still here. I don't know why it went off, but as
Okay.
far as the conference, I would echo Kimberly's observations about the time series, and think it brings, obviously broader use cases, and it'll bring more people to the party and help Mongo in general in the community.
Nice. So that is a tough thing to say anything in 10 words or less. That's probably the hardest exercise anyone can ask. So we'll see if we get any good ones from the audience. And if we do get any good ones, I'll be sure to share them. Just again, to keep things rolling here, any surprises coming out of MongoDB.live? I know this is a loaded question, right? But any surprises from your perspectives in any angle, in any way? Why don't we go backwards? Oh, there you are, Bill. Your video's on. So, Bill.
I don't think there were many surprises. It's all very positive, and we'll see how the execution is on the update side with regard to Atlas only versus Dev, and we'll see. I think that's the biggest wildcard for the community, obviously.
Nice. Kimberly?
I agree with Bill. I mean, I think the biggest surprise is not the surprise, right? It's the existence of the new licensing, the new release methodology, that they are actually going to have only the .1, .2, .3 be available for their Atlas customers, not for the enterprise customers. So I think it will be a surprise to some to not get those particular features and updates until the next version. And to truly, even if you're a previous enterprise customer, to not be able to have support for on-prem. So I think we'll see a lot of questions, concerns, et cetera, from that over the time.
Right.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yeah, go ahead. All you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Look, I didn't find anything too surprising. I didn't know about serverless Atlas, and I find that very interesting. We can talk a bit about that more, what it means in the long term, because I think it is a kind of an interesting innovation. I was really quite surprised by some of the things that I'd hoped for that weren't there. I thought Data Lake might extend onto other platforms other than AWS. I thought the BI connector might get a major rework. It seems like there's a few things in the portfolio that were really screaming out to be improved, and we didn't see that. But obviously, we've got some other, great features. But I'd really been waiting for a long time for some help there.
Here.
Yeah, I too was a little surprised there wasn't more steps taken in Atlas, given how much the MongoDB Incorporated is now focusing on Atlas services compared to its core server relatively. But then it is a bigger moving ship. I can appreciate maybe it's harder to continue at the pace that they were continuing. So yeah, I was a little surprised Atlas hadn't other Atlas features besides the core database hadn't developed as much, which is, I guess, is kind of not making, maybe I'm not respecting how much has gone into the new serverless feature, which we'll get to later. But yeah, I was surprised that I was not surprised about the developments in version 5.0. We've been watching what's coming through there code-wise for a couple of months already. So as it came out, that's good. Todd, you were pointing out that only 1 in 10 of the conference sessions covered the core CVDB. 90% of it was about Atlas or maybe a few other general things. That's not a surprise. That's the same as last year. As of last year, everything went so strong on Atlas, and the server began disappearing. So that's not a surprise at all. That's the same. There's no change. It's the core DB server really seems to be disappearing from the annual conference. Yeah.
Interesting. So as far as the big announcements, and we expected that Atlas was going to be obviously the lead, the lead of the show. There was going to be obviously lots of focus on Atlas, so no shock by any means there. But as far as the other announcements that we saw, the three major ones, I mean, they were very clear about these three items that they featured in the press release and in the first keynote on Tuesday. Around native time series support, live resharding, versioned API. They referenced a bunch of things around each of those. With the live resharding, of course, they reference it takes a lot of the pain and the risk away from having to reshard, which is obviously a very risky practice. And of course, there was a fair amount of content around time series support and versioned APIs. So I'd love to get your thoughts, everyone's thoughts on each of those, and maybe which you thought was more impressive or which you thought was most needed. Feel free to jump in, whoever would like to start.
Okay, deadlock. Go for it. Okay, Guy wins. Go for it, Guy.
Okay, sure. So look, I thought the time series feature was, a really mature offering, and it is a good example of MongoDB pushing into a new sort of workload, and that's the sort of thing I like to see more of. Giving them the ability to work effectively with different types of transactional workloads than they have done in the past. We haven't sort of had time to sort of dig into it, and I think Akira's done more low-level digging in, but there is some real changes at the storage level to optimize this. The windowing functions give us an ability to analyze data in this format that I find really welcome. Having used windowing functions, SQL, they're a very powerful way to extract meaning from data. And an increasing number of applications really are sort of, IoT and other domains are generating data that's time-stamped at very, very high frequency. So I think this one, probably we'll all kind of agree on this, is a good move, welcome feature, and seems to be reasonably well implemented in its first release, aside from the fact that it currently doesn't support transactions themselves or sharding, which I guess we expect that just to come in the future.
Yeah, just to kind of build on that, the very thing, I think it seems like MongoDB has faced some pressure from other larger purpose-built databases such as InfluxDB, specifically for time series collection. So it's going to be interesting to see how actually truly performant this is for MongoDB users, as opposed to, hey, this is another feature that we can have so that you don't look somewhere else. So excited to look towards that.
On that point, I was kind of a bit surprised that they didn't take a native time series DB and provide that as another service. With their Atlas search, they've put Lucene behind the Atlas proxy, and the Atlas proxy that you connect to will through what appears to be a database query, will set off a bit of a query first to the text set to Lucene, then it comes back and do another lookup for the matching documents in the MongoDB cluster, and then return it. So given that they've already worked out how to plan the driver API and plan how the proxy works, I wonder why they didn't use a native, just another time series DB behind. Well, it was a possibility. It didn't have to be that way, but it didn't. I didn't think it had to be inside the MongoD process itself. It could have been there, and particularly given that they'd already done that with Lucene, I thought, maybe I'm surprised they sort of resisted that chance to make it a paid-only feature. That was yeah. I didn't understand why. Not that it's bad in MongoDB, but based on the precedent of Lucene being used, I was a bit surprised.
Yeah, Todd, I would add that the people who are looking into the time series world of Mongo need to understand that there were technical and functional trade-offs made in that implementation. Some of it was described in the sessions and everything, for example, deleting. I would have liked to have seen that wrapped with a charts demo at the same time to really pop what's the possibilities with time series and charts together. It'd be a very compelling demo, not just talk about the low-level bits.
Okay. Yes, there is a good time series demonstration, a reasonably okay time series demonstration in one of the videos which is now available on YouTube, you can watch. However, they did leave out various points, and they didn't seem to want to shock MongoDB users too quickly. They didn't point out that, for example, you don't update or delete. As far as I recall, they don't point out that you don't delete time series data once you put it in. It's there until you drop the whole collection. Or alternatively, if you set up a TTL index, but you don't. This TTL index is different. You only create it at the time that you can only make it at the time that you first create the collection. So it's not an ordinary TTL index. So they sort of covered up some things, and of course there's still these limitations. There's a bunch of things. It's not supported with field level encryption. It doesn't work with Realm. It doesn't work with, can't be combined with Atlas search. Schema validation is not used, and I can see why when you see how it's implemented at the bottom. You can't use out as an aggregate $out. Transactions also, chain strings are also, and they avoided all that. And I really missed the days where a MongoDB conference, just a developer got up and started talking about all the gnarly details, and everybody could start seeing the shape of, and you could picture, you could in your mind, okay, they've coded this much and they haven't coded that much, or oh, of course, yeah, that concept and that concept doesn't go together. Of course, it can't do that. Like it's bad for time series that you put a delete interface into it. That could be quite a slow operation if you do. Native time series databases don't do that easily either. Well, all the ones that I know of, you don't just delete a single one. But yeah, the fact that they used to talk about those issues more openly, and they don't now, sort of makes it a lot less educational when I see that content.
Yeah, and kind of to go along with both of those points, the conference in general had a lot more high level, not a lot of hands-on. Like even the demos for the live resharding, it was a minimalistic, demo, obviously because it's live and much easier to contain that. But really just getting into the guts and how it's going to work for time series specifically, not sharding, because time series collections really are buckets, and shards to some extent are also buckets. So not being able to shard buckets, not being able to shard buckets upon buckets. So I think it's a little more difficult that they're working underneath the cover still to integrate those other functionalities and other areas that Kira was talking about, right? So, and then the second point, just the overall technical difference between conferences, the MongoDB.live conferences, 3 years ago versus now. Online it's been difficult for all of us, and some people have done more virtual sessions versus fewer. So it was a lot of information, but not a lot of technical depth.
Yeah, they are having a community day coming up. I'm not sure. I don't think the date's been announced yet, but within, I think, 4 weeks, there'll be 1 or 2 community days where community people will be able to come, and perhaps it'll be, a little bit more down in the weeds. But other than that, I agree. It's hardly worth watching most of those sessions. And
okay, did anyone else watch the puppets?
Twice. There's 2, aren't there?
There's 2. I know there's 2. Authentication Station and what was the other one it was for? Wow.
Could not bring myself to that. Yeah. But it's an ingenious use of technology. I don't want to be on camera. We can fix that. Here you are.
I can't wait for the replay on this. I have to see that. That sounds like a good use of maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah, but they will.
Or 1.
Yeah. So we will be looking forward to the sessions, the community days, because I know that's where a lot of the true tech is talked about in depth with the Q&A as well. So. Yeah.
100%. There's only so much they can fit in that time, and that's all good. So I do want to interrupt things just quickly here, and we can jump back to these 3 top releases that they had, which are really important. They're a huge part of what we do here in terms of being able to support it. So there's a question from somebody on the Zoom side. So the question is, looking forward, can you say and be sure that MongoDB can stay really open source and community driven technology, or is it coming to the area of like Oracle technology? I feel like, Akira, this may have been a setup. And maybe you set this question up somehow under a different name. But anyway, it's an interesting topic nonetheless. Obviously, you know, Percona is in the business of open source. That's who we are. And it's our lifeblood, and we think of the community, we think of open source users, and this is a very appropriate question considering everything. And I think some of the early conversation we had in this first 20 minutes so far, you know, referencing some of the moves that MongoDB is making, and maybe we can talk about also how monetization happens in companies like that make the pivot. But anyway, let's stick with the question. I'm happy to repeat it if I just talked myself into a circle, but I think, Akira, at least you understood it. Maybe if you want to take a first stab at that.
So I opened the Q&A window and I see, look, the question was from Haim, looking forward, can we say and be sure that MongoDB stays really open source and community driven technology, or it's coming to the end of it's coming to an era of being like Oracle technology? And well, the answer is yes, the latter. It is moving into that. MongoDB is open source as in you can read it, but it's not open source as recognized by the open source community. And it's not just a bunch of language lawyers saying you can't, you haven't crossed the line, you haven't filled in the forms. MongoDB's server-side public license says this is open source, but then it goes on to write a clause, which clause number 13, the famous SSPL number 13, which directly contradicts the open source directive item number 1, which is that there's no restriction on reuse, which is the tough thing for companies that want to prevent others just copying their software, running their software, and charging fees for it instead of them. But the two things clash, and there's just, you can't say that MongoDB is open source. They do, however, allow people to run themselves. That's in the contract. They of their own of their own creation say you can run this. You just can't commercialize this as a service. Summarizing that, I'm going to say that's like, well, you can't put it up on the cloud and charge like a per hour or per monthly fee for it. That's not the hard and fixed meaning of a service, but that's obviously what they'd like to prevent. So this makes, at Percona, MongoDB database the only database that is not open source. You can use it, we can provide it to you, and you can use it without restrictions, so long as you don't charge it as a service, etc. But so far as licenses go, it is SSPL, and it has been SSPL back since 2018 or maybe even late 2017. So it is different to the other databases that Percona supports in terms of its license. In a way, and other ways we work with it exactly the same, but in terms of license, it's not open source. And MongoDB upstream is not like Oracle. We can't see Oracle's code, Oracle the database, but it's certainly a lot like it's more, and it's not even like Oracle's MySQL. It's an in-between situation. But definitely, when you see the change, the sea change, which happened in MongoDB as they went IPO, it's definitely changed into an Oracle-like company, which is just a way of doing business. That's fine. But yeah, it's not open source. Percona is providing MongoDB in their Percona server MongoDB distribution under the terms of the SSPL, which you can look at the code and we can understand the code, which is what makes us good at serving it and understanding it and debugging it, and occasionally putting fixes into it. Although then MongoDB will, instead of accepting the fix, re-implement it themselves, so there's no outside contribution. That's the extent to which they put a firewall down between outside contribution. So yeah,
I think that's all fair comment. I'll say something sort of like vaguely in defense of MongoDB and something critical. Vaguely in defense, I think they have to work out how they're going to make money off the product that we all sort of benefit from, and we're all fans of, or we wouldn't be here. And I think the risk that Amazon in particular would take their code and just run it as a service, as they've done with other open source products, monetize it, and basically, suck the life out of it, was a real threat, and is a real threat to open source in general. And I don't blame them for responding with the SSPL, even though it's sort of like agreed, it violates the core principles of open source to some extent. The other thing I'll say is correct me if you think I'm wrong, but MongoDB has never really been a community-driven product, even when it was truly open source. This is a product that's pretty much created by one company, and as you've said, they're sort of like, they don't sort of take outside contributions particularly well. Postgres is sort of like, I suppose, the poster child for a truly community-driven open source database. I guess I'm saying it is what it is. But we still have a lot of the benefits of open source in that there's a free version. We can look at the code. We can run it without restriction under sort of like a wide variety of circumstances. I'll just say one more thing and I'll be quiet. I do happen to know that there is a bit of a sort of like a battle within, I wouldn't call it a battle, but there are different camps within the MongoDB corporation. Some people are sort of like actively trying to make sure that everything's kept as open as possible. They do things like making the JIRAs, continue to make the JIRAs open so we can see what's coming up. There's other forces, people who worked at companies like Oracle, and they would, I guess, if given their way, close it up even more. So, we can't be sure how it'll work out over time.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Guy, MongoDB has a lot of engineers that put a lot of hours into the code base, et cetera. So that should be there as far as that goes. But I think in terms of what the community, they still offer that to us, to the general MongoDB users. But I think the next couple of months are going to be truly telling as bugs are discovered and things are baked in, or they backported to the community version of 5.0, as opposed to the things that are just going to be 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 Atlas only releases. So it's an interesting time, and we're going to really see how that works out for MongoDB and for us as well, right? Obviously, they spent the money on R&D. They want to earn the money back, so that's totally understandable.
And I would add, it's a careful balancing act, obviously, between the open source, the freely downloadable stuff, and the numbers were pretty amazing. They effectively doubled in the last year. Grossly speaking, 150 million downloads, I would say. And as they point out, Atlas is very easily consumable, which is true. But a lot of people, obviously 70 more million downloads in the last year, just want to run it locally. And they do need an ROI and all that good stuff. So we'll see how the year unfolds.
That's a great point. It has not slowed, at least over the last year and a half, through some of the numbers I was looking at too. So that makes a lot of sense. So thank you to everyone answering that question. I think it's a really important question to consider, and I'm sure it was in the back of those that were in the back of the minds of those that are watching, and of course the team here on the panel. So just going back to, I know we left a few things on the table regarding some of the other topics around either time series, resharding, or versioned API. And there was a comment in one of the I don't know if it was on Facebook or whatever the location is, but there's a comment about versioning API and that it's awesome feature. It's an awesome feature for ops. Does that comment spark any thoughts for anyone here that the versioned API is a great feature for operations?
Anyone else want to go? So
I'll just say, if it works.
Yeah.
That's my only thought about it, really.
Thank you, Guy. Yeah. It's going to be a very challenging implementation. I mean, they're starting it fresh off from 5.0, right? That means you can't go back and use it for 4. Whatever, but from 5.0 on. And I think one of the reasons that this is being put into play is because there are so many customers out there who are still even running on version 3.6 because they just can't upgrade because of drivers that they have and having to upgrade their whole massive stack. So this is a great feature, assuming that, as Guy said, they're able to implement it correctly and it does end up working, because then the developers wouldn't have to worry about upgrading their drivers immediately, right? Or the operations would not have to worry about all of the problems that a mismatched driver could cause. But under the covers, just like resharding, I'm not going to get on that yet, but everything under the covers and how it's actually working, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how it works in real production under heavy load and if there's any kind of impact to performance.
It really blows out your number of QA tests, like which flavor of the API are you using. So hopefully they'll hire some more QA people and get the automation in sync so everyone can trust it.
Yeah. So I'm an old DBA at heart, and I just sort of like the idea that I'm going to say, hey, I'm just going to upgrade the database. Don't you worry about it. It won't affect you because of this versioning API. No, I'll still want to test, right? I'll still want to make sure that when I upgrade the database that it really doesn't affect any of the other drivers. And, it's a lot, they're biting off a lot with this. That's, I guess, what I'm saying.
Yeah, so along that same point, I used to work for a company, I'm not going to say who, but they had a poster on the wall, and the guy, the most interesting man in the beer in the world, and it was a beer commercial for Tecate, right? And it was a similar poster, and it said, "We never test our code until it hits production," right? A similar thing, and unfortunately, that is true in a lot of development shops. So this will help that. So, Kira, I know you were itching for have something to say there too. I can see it.
Okay, but for people who are viewing and haven't seen the what MongoDB has published about it in the conference, there is a API version talk which was given by Jesse Giroux, and like the time series one, he does point towards the gotchas that will apply to this, whereas the time series just avoided the gotchas. So it's a good one, and it's worth watching if you want to catch up with what this is going to supply. One part in that talk was, imagine the ability if you're a DB team and an application team, and you've got 17 different apps that are all connected to the same one, and there's one you're not going to get to. You're not going to be able to update the drivers. You want to just leave that one as it is without doing a re-release of that application, but otherwise take care of upgrading your database as you're supposed to, and let the other apps continue using the new version. Wouldn't it be nice, if you could just freeze the API that one slightly legacy app was using? It's a really, really appealing idea, but I just think you're just putting off your disasters until later, and that MongoDB has added an awful lot to the server code for every single command, and even operators, not just commands, but also operators within them now need to track what they're doing differently for different API versions. And that will make the code too confusing to understand in the long term. So my feeling is this is going to be untenable, or it's going to be very painful. I can't say untenable because they'll have to keep on going with it, but it's going to make it painful for them 3 years down the road. And for users who are doing upgrades and not doing upgrades, the same thing. Eventually, they'll come to a point where they have to test changing the API version or upgrading their drivers, either one. I mean, what was wrong with upgrading your drivers? MongoDB has a wide range of server support for any given DB driver version I've seen. I always thought it was great for any given DB driver, and it varies because they have so many, and of course there were many different versions, but it always felt as though they could support 3 or 4 major versions at once of the server. That is a very broad window. And of course, they're becoming more and more stable as time goes on. I don't see the issue with upgrading the drivers in the application and restarting your application compared to changing your API version object that you make in the connection. I don't see the value in all, and this is the main thing that I think is adding. Like, it's going to make MongoDB the main thing that's making it the legacy database, the shape that I believe it's taking on now. I think it was a bad architectural choice. I can see how very, very appealing the idea is to application developers now, but they're just putting it off their pain for a few years down the road. I didn't like this feature at all.
So, Akira, did they mention anything as far as like when the backward version would basically break? Because as you point out, trying to get consistent behaviors over, let's say, a decade, which is reasonable for some applications and enterprises.
Well, they didn't, but I noticed in Jesse's presentation, he did a timeline. He was saying, oh, these ones here will be okay, and eventually they'll be cut off. He drew 4 lines, so I'm sort of having a feeling it'll only go as far as the current supported lifespan of MongoDB, which tends to cover 3 or 4 major versions. I mean, that's, again, I'm sure that's just his image, and who knows? But that's what came out of our presentation. I believe it indicates what they're probably thinking, but they can clarify that.
And then if they stick to their yearly cycles, it's basically 4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Cool. So there's a bunch of other areas we could touch on, outside of these. Kimberly, you had a bunch of things I think you wanted to cover. I just want to make sure we touched on those areas as far as resharding goes in time series. Were there any other comments you had around that?
So yeah, resharding, I mean, just wanted everyone to kind of jump in here. I mean, everyone knows that it's been this thorn in a lot of developer sides over the years is not knowing enough about your data, what it's going to be in the future, or how it might be used. This is how it's used now, but as it grows and grows and grows, hey, maybe we needed to have done something differently. And all of a sudden we have disk imbalances, we have hotspotting going on, we have, major performance problems related to needing to change that. And so this is a big step, and they've been working towards it over time. The first step was like making so that you can change the values that exist currently in a shard key. And then they add refining a shard key so that you could add suffixes to it to more finely grained tune it, and now building up to fully rechargeable shard keys. So in watching those presentations over the last 2 days, the live resharding presentation, you get a good overview, and you hear the talk of cloning. You hear about the ways that you could do it. And a couple things weren't covered. Before, you could not have to redo your whole entire database. You could just add a second collection with the correct shard and have the data dumped there, and then do a dual write system until you got caught up. And that wasn't mentioned. But in reality, what that's doing, it's cloning. And so now resharding is going to be cloning, and they talk about it as being as simple as push a button and your resharding will start. You're going into the new collection. But if you're doing all of those multiple writes, you're adding write activities to the system. And so I have not seen any talk yet on what kind of performance impact that might have. So I'm thinking in my mind, and based on my experience in manually doing some of these reshards that can take a long period of time over very active systems, that there's going to have to be some kind of performance trade-off. And so I was just wondering what you guys had thought and what you heard from the sessions as well, and also whoever wants to kind of add to that. It's a super important feature. So
I'll defer to Kira and Guy since they're a little bit more low level.
Well, I'll defer to Akira probably, but I think you're right. You're still going to want to get your shard key right first off, if you possibly can. The idea that this is not a feature where you're going to be, changing your mind about your shard key every other week. It'll still be a major undertaking. And I think the one case that and you guys have more experience in this, but the one case that makes sense is when you decide that you're going to geographically shard. That's when this feature is sort of particularly useful, because even if you've been very careful about getting the right shard key, the point at which you want to distribute your data geographically is a point where you logically will really need this.
Yeah, actually, that's a good. I didn't know that use case, but yeah, you're right. That would totally do it. Even the careful planner will need reshard sometime, or could need reshard sometime. Reshard is definitely my favorite feature in 5.0. Is there anyone who didn't feel the same, that maybe it was time series is the better one? Well, you have a reason to, Guy, but yeah.
Yeah, no, well, see, lots of people don't use shards, and some people who do shouldn't. So, it's a feature that sort of affects the top end. It's a bit like when the government comes out with a great new feature for billionaires or something. Yeah, great, good on them. But the rest of us, what do we get out of it? So,
I get a lot out of it, and I can tell Kimberly does too. Yeah.
Sure. So I don't have a sharded cluster, so that's where my total perspective comes from.
Yeah.
Well, with regard to sharding, I mean, my point of view is when you get to a 2 terabyte or more collection, you probably should have sharded a long time ago, because you still have auto scaling, but then you're going to be auto scaling and auto scaling and auto scaling. And all of a sudden you're back to the same old massive Oracle or data warehouse in terms of that. And any maintenance that you really need to do is going to end up taking a long time. So, yeah, I've always been a fan of sharding, and sharding before you have to, because of the impact that distributing all the data chunks across X number of shards and replicating the data would have. But this is the reason Akira's probably seeing me kind of chomping at the bit here, is that exact thing that we're talking about. Is so many people are afraid to shard because they don't know how, right? And or they pick the wrong shard key and they get battle scarred. Something happens. So this is a great thing. It's going to allow customers to not be quite so afraid of it. And with practice, you can get better. You can take the opportunity to learn and really understand why the high cardinality, why the 3 factors that really make the difference, distinctiveness and high cardinality and non-monotonically increasing, are so important. So yeah, anyone out there, if you're sitting on a massive, even a single terabyte or 2 terabyte or 5 terabyte or 80 terabyte, whatever it is, because data is just growing and growing and growing. That's not going away. But don't be afraid to shard. But please do think about it before you pick your shard key still, like Guy said.
Yeah. In the presentation, they referred to, the way you used to do resharding before was like a dump and then a cold shutdown and insert again with new shard key and go. So that was a long downtime. And they said another way you could do use an external script and run the cloning phase and then do the catch up with the oplog, but redistributing to where the new shards are for each update. That was they said, and that is very slow and it takes a long time. It's like, well, even with a new method, it's going to take a long time, because the reason you're doing resharding is you've already got a huge data set and you're already in pain, particularly at your ability to handle the write load. Bad sharding, it mostly increases the read load, but it's the write load is the most painful still. If you've got to that point where you've got, say, 20 shards and non-targeted queries are causing a lot of read load and everything's just going slow and so forth, and you're going to change and you want to change the shard key to fix this, running reshard without adding more shards to spread the write load, because there's going to be a faster write load as they clone as fast as possible, is not going to work. You're just doubling your write load on your servers when you're already in pain. Let's say I'm very glad that in the reshard collection command, there is one of the options you can put in is zones. You can specify which zones to use. This will give you the opportunity to first add new shards, and then specify, put some sort of shard tag on them, or zoning rather, and then say, we're doing this reshard, but write to new servers, please. Because this is the only way you're going to get out of your hole where the load in the servers is already drowning you. You're going to need more hardware to get out of it. So whether you're using the old method or using the reshard collection method, you're going to need more power to get out of that hole. But still, having an inbuilt command, and to me the inbuilt command is the same thing. It's just inside as a whole bunch of classes. It's a really large command, actually. The amount of code that goes with this command and a few others is way more than any other command I've seen added before. Of course, the classic CRUD operations are big, but apart from that, when I saw there's a whole subdirectory and it's like this long with files of CPP and header files, I was like, that's a lot of code. Okay, but it's better inside, but it's still the same basic idea: cloning, oplog, catch up, and that at the end the commit is controlled. Now that's something you couldn't do from outside. You couldn't block other users cleanly, but at the end of the reshard command, it will get down to the point where apparently the trigger is when it sees it's only got less than 2 seconds to catch up to finishing. It has to, at some point, it has to say, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to finish that, not worry about any other writes that are coming in, and finish it and switch over, where they rename the collections and go back to the original UUID and all that sort of stuff. That will block the write, so you don't have to be worried that as you're doing that final switchover, some application is sending a write to the old collection. That won't be an issue. So that's an extra thing, is that final commit is also cleaner, but otherwise it's They've just put that what it used to be external scripts inside, and that is just much better. I particularly appreciate that not only have they added reshard collection, they made it nice and easy to monitor. The values that have been updated go into the current output, which is very long and verbose and hard to read. But we saw a very neat demonstration. They made some sort of script to make it like a one-page summary. We saw the progress. That comes from the current output. So I want the script that they use to make it nice and clean. That'd be cool. But otherwise, that information is already in the current op output. So it's very clean and easy to monitor how fast you're catching up. And if anyone has done a migration like this, everybody wants to know how the progress is going. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Or is it proceeding at all? Sort of thing. They've got that from the beginning. It is a really well planned. As the project manager, or the UI designer, they did a very good job at this. I really like it, and also the fact that they've got, and I'm very happy about this. They've got an abort reshard collection command and a cleanup reshard collection if you do afterwards. The ability to cleanly get out of a process is hard to do, but they've put that in. I'm impressed. Kudos, much kudos to this development. I really do like it.
I think they've had to add so much more to DBOps, because I remember back, 2.4.10, et cetera, when there wasn't a lot of information, or when your prompt just returned OK1, didn't talk about how many changes had actually been happening. And so I think as they've developed Atlas, they've had to add these additional metrics as they've added functionality, right, to the different features. And so they've had to have more information being returned to provide exactly that status. So it makes sense that that's happening. So there was a comment from one of the panelists that was talking about their recommendations for 50%, this is for Gerald, 50% IO and 1.2 disk space for the resharding in version 5.0. As he said, he'd heard that somewhere. So I missed that, and I don't remember you saying the same either, Akira. But another thing is his comment was resharding if data usage patterns is cool, change is cool, but how well will restarting work under high loads and at scale? I don't want to be the first. And so that's kind of the exact thing. We need to see how well it's actually going to work, because you're adding space because you're duplicating, and you need additional IO for that new disk, and for the IO and for the activity that's going, for the cloning activities that are going on. But how is it not, even if it's that temporary global lock, when they basically rename the collection in the metadata, in the config databases, how long is that going to last? That's pretty quick. Or if you're going to do dual writes, et cetera, it's the equivalent of doing dual writes for a cloning procedure. So it'll be interesting to see what the true performance impact will be for some of the larger, extremely active, write-heavy customers. And that's all kind of just unknown at this point, right? Akira and I've done a couple of tests on resharding, but they were super basic, super busy, and they were with a packaged load, not with a real performance load. So Jared, I'm upset that you won't be the first one. We could watch along with you, but don't worry, we'll be doing some testing on this end.
I probably should update you, Kimberly. When we did it, the chunk moves seemed to be going so slow. It was like we had 10 chunks being moved. Apparently, there's a hard-coded 5-minute limit, as it is at the moment. So that might have been the reason why it seemed to be slow. Yeah, we'd have to spin up 60 servers or something and do a really heavy test to see how good it is. To be honest, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, just super excited to see this in action, right? Hoping that it's a true function, because it's something everyone wanted for so long, right? Along with, and here's a little bit of unless Guy or Bill had anything to say, we're going to talk more about the resumable index builds. So that's another super important one. You guys, Guy or Bill, did y'all have anything that you had to say about the resharding? Anything more?
I was just going to point out one thing that Kira had slightly mentioned, was that Mongo has done a really good job of expanding their user experience in their development teams. And then Akira just mentioned it indirectly, so a lot more usable.
Yeah, this is this was an advance compared to a lot of functionality that's been developed. Well, sorry, the code in MongoDB is really good. It was particularly the fact that they worked on having a way to leave a long-running process and cancel it and back out. That I thought was, and plus the monitoring, improved monitoring, like just like it was something simpler like an index build. I really appreciate that, and I think users should definitely appreciate that, and it's a step up. It's yep. I applaud it a lot.
So I think we have time maybe for one more topic, if we can agree on that. There's a lot of topics that we didn't hit. I can suggest one. How about I suggest one? And maybe by the look in your faces, I'll either back away from it or we'll push forward.
I'd vote for what Guy wanted to mention, the long-running queries or the add cluster timeline. Yeah, I'd vote with Guy. I'm assuming that's one you want, Guy.
Oh, I can certainly talk to it. I'll try and be brief.
Okay.
So this is one that's sort of a bit buried. They didn't make a big deal of it. We saw a little bit of it in 4.4, but when transactions first came out in 4.0, they were very limited. They could only have 16 megabytes of changes, and they could only have a duration of 1 minute by default, which limited them to really just very, very tiny transactions. In our application, we have some really quite long-running workloads that we'd like to make transactional, but we couldn't live within those restrictions, so we had to build our own locking system. So now that what they've done is they've moved the snapshots that are used to keep the consistent reads for a transaction out of wide target memory and onto durable data on disk. So it's a bit like, if you know Oracle, it's like a rollback segment that's now got unlimited storage, or at least as much storage as you've got disk space for. And this really opens up transactions to a much broader applicability. And I like it for two reasons. One is just a selfish reason that we kind of need it, because we see a lot of inconsistencies as we're doing long-running index scans, and the data's changing underneath us, and it's really frustrating to get wrong results out of a database. But the other reason I like it is it shows that they've followed through on what was a checkbox item. They haven't just left it as a checkbox. We've got transactions done, let's move on. Instead, they've developed it, matured it to the point at which it's starting to approach what is available in other systems like MySQL or Postgres. So I'm pretty pleased with that one.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So so we do have a little bit of time. We've had some comments streaming in, but let's maybe pick. We had something in the list that looked a little bit juicy. What if we talked quickly about serverless as it relates to Atlas database as a service? Kira, was there anything interesting about this serverless iteration, of Atlas DBAS?
Well, I mean, okay, who likes the fact that it's called serverless when in fact it's all full of servers? Okay, everyone's hands down. Nobody likes this naming thing, but yeah.
Sounds like the marketers had something to do with that, right? And
well,
I'm slapping myself on the hand right now, being one.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't. Not the first. This is around, but yeah, it's a cloud managed option, and they're changing the pricing model to be by operation and plus storage size plus per write cost, instead of being where you're obliged to choose how much server you're going to rent, this size server or then this size disk or not. It's a cloud service. It's interesting for them to change it around. It would be so interesting to see the performance statistics that they're collecting. Over thousands of nodes, and that would be educational for the whole IT industry. Not that but the same would apply. We would ask AWS to do this or Azure to do this. Would you please share your business knowledge with the outside world? Well, they're not going to. So that one interesting point about it is not available to me. So okay, it's a pricing model. That's welcome to try it out. I don't like the name serverless, but what can you do?
I can see why they chose serverless though. I mean, serverless functions are Lambda functions and so forth. They obviously run on a server, but the point here is that you're not required to allocate a server and pay for it when you're not using it. Obviously, under the hoods, this means that your workloads are running in a sort of a co-tenanted Atlas server somewhere. And so there's sort of security implications for that, and probably performance. You can't guarantee exclusive access to the resources that you're sharing with everyone else who's running serverless. But it's kind of the dream, isn't it, for database as a service, to just pay for the CPU and the memory when you use it, and not sort of like when it's just sitting there idle overnight. So I'm a bit surprised they did it, because I'm not sure what's in it for them. But I think it progresses Atlas along nicely.
So just one quick point about the auto scaling, right? I think there's a case study from like around January 4th or 5th when Slack had a major outage, right? And it ended up being something associated with auto scaling. So one thing about when you auto scale with MongoDB, a lot of times your performance can improve temporarily by adding more resources to something, right? By auto scaling, by adding additional shards, by adding additional resources, disk, whatever. But if you're not going back and fixing that original problem that's causing your performance issue, if you can just ignore it because you just keep scaling up or scale out further, then you're never going to fix that problem, most likely. And you're going to end up scaled way beyond what you actually need. So that's one of the tricks, or something will happen and it will look like you're not using this set of servers or resources, and it will scale down, and then you'll run a marketing campaign and all of a sudden you need everything at once, and you basically almost DDoS yourself. So that's something to just kind of think of. Just like you can't think of the reshard button as a magic button that's going to fix everything immediately, you can't always totally rely on auto scaling to help you as well.
Yeah, but the interesting thing here is they're auto scaling down, so that's the thing that I like. Like, they always auto scaled up. I could see what was in it for them in that. But to have them sort of bring it all the way down to zero, when you're not using it, except for the disk storage, for some cases, that'll change the whole economics of the product in a favorable way for the users. And most of the other cloud databases, you have to sort of reserve your utilization, your CPU and your memory, which is annoying. And I'm sure you've all done it. You start a server, you forget that you did it, and then you find at the end of the month, hundreds of thousands of dollars just wasted on something that was sitting there idle. So if they can get around that, great.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, true.
I think services is just another way of making it super simple to consume. So in great contrast, some of us would recall installing Oracle, right? How many panels did you go through in their wizard? How many decisions did you have to make? Whereas now, just spin it up and get the connection string.
But MongoDB was easy to set up and store compared to Oracle.
Oh, absolutely.
MongoDB,
This is even easier.
Yeah, it is. And certainly, if you have a small data set and small load, I've got no reason to call you to get my services. That is the most economical and easy way to do it. Definitely. But if you are getting bigger and you want to self-educate, that's not the place to be, because you can't see into the center. That's what I love. I love seeing right down in the center. Just want to get my X-ray eyes out and get down to the atomic level, which you can't do in cloud. And it's different users, different preferences.
So one more thing that we didn't really get a chance to talk about before we go bye-bye. Resumable index builds is another huge thing that, from an operations standpoint, DevOps, et cetera, anyone, really, it's super important for them. So I wanted to just make sure that we talked for a second about that and the implications. And, we talked about the 80 gig or 800 gig or 2 terabyte collection or whatever. And imagine building an index across that, and imagine getting almost all the way through, and then something happens and you're missing index on one 500 gig or 2 terabyte shard, and your query is going along and it's using the index, and then all of a sudden it hits the data in that shard and there's no index. So the beauty of this is not just resumable, but it's not just retrying, it's resumable. It will pick up totally automatic, supposedly. So this is a big thing for operations people, right?
Yeah, I mean, 2 big pain resolutions, the other one being the resharding in one major release is actually, I think that's a for my memory, that's a record for MongoDB. They're maturing and making it more stable. That is definitely. I haven't done a hands-on with that one yet, though. I'm sorry to say, I can't throw any extra detail on it.
Yes, you can tell we're going to have a lot of fun the next couple of months.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Kimberly, for bringing that up. Did you have any more? Did you want to cover? I just want to make sure we respect the hour.
I think that's pretty much what we have. We had a comment from the gallery about whether or not the serverless would work with regions, multi-regions or sharding, but those are all things we'll find out as we go along. So just wanted to address that.
Yeah, and these questions and comments are great. We'll use these as follow-up for sure. Maybe we have some more commentary we can offer in a blog format of sorts. So I do obviously want to thank everyone for attending. This was so much fun, and thank you for the friends part of Percona and Friends, to Guy and to Bill. It's middle of the night officially for Guy and for Akira. Thank you both for staying awake and not nodding off. I don't know how I would have woken you up if you did nod off, other than yell and annoy everybody. So thank you for not nodding off. And yeah, thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate everybody's time. A quick plug: we do have a webinar coming up on July 27th with a customer with Fiserv. They're going to talk all about their move from MongoDB to Percona from a services and support perspective. So following up on this conversation and the ones we've had in previous webinars, like our sharding webinar from last week, this should blend nicely with that and hopefully give you some nice context. So go to percona.com and you can register there for that on July 27th. And thank you again to the panelists. That was a lot of fun. Thank you for taking time, Bill. And of course, Kimberly on the boat. Enjoy the rest of your time on the boat, and you can give up your 5G wireless that you have now or keep it. And thank you everyone for attending, and we will see you next time we do this.
Take care, everyone.